All About Relationships is an engaging, lighthearted, and practical show designed to help people improve their relationships in meaningful ways. Hosted by Dr. Don Allen, a certified Gottman therapist, as well as an advanced trainer for the Institute. He is also certified in emotion-focused therapy. With over 40 years of experience in the field of psychotherapy, Dr. Allen is here to provide expert guidance on strengthening marriages, parent-child relationships, friendships, and more. Through insightful discussions, audience call-ins, and guest experts, viewers receive real-world strategies to enhance intimacy, communication, and overall relationship satisfaction. So now, please welcome the host of All About Relationships, Dr. Don Allen.
And welcome back. I'm Dr. Don Allen. This is All About Relationships, working towards ideal marriage and loving, lasting relationships. We are on episode number 14. I can't believe how fast the year is going by. And my title for today's show is, If You Don't Think for Yourself, Others Will Think for You. So that's kind of a cool name. Actually, it's one of the chapters I'm writing in my book. So I hope that that's going to be fun for you to listen to at some point or read. So anyway, one of the things I always ask at the beginning is, what have I done for my relationship today? And the good news is that you are watching my show, which is something that you are doing. And this is very good information on how best practices occur when you use these principles. Okay. A lot of what I utilize is the Gottman method, as well as emotion-focused therapy. But again, I've been in the field for a while, and I like to pull in a lot of science from a lot of different places. You're going to see that a little bit more today. But we're going to have fun with it. We're going to look at that. And we're also going to kind of challenge your mind here to say what I mean. If you don't think for yourself, other people will think for you. So let me ask you some questions, all right? When was the last time you stopped and asked yourself, where did my opinion come from? You know, a lot of times we have opinions about things. People talk, you go back and forth, you have beliefs, you have values, you have things that you think that are very important to you. And sometimes we just kind of have a working knowledge of it. We don't stop and say, I wonder where that came from. Was it something I thought through? Was it something that I thought myself? Or was it something you somehow, some way absorbed, maybe didn't even know it, right? Did we hear a pitch phrase that helped us rationalize or justify something we did impulsively? One of the things I hear a lot with commercials is, I deserve this, I deserve that. And many times if I hear it, I might say, well, you know what, I can justify buying it for myself or getting it for myself. And I'm not saying it's bad for you to do that, because I really respect you. So it's kind of your choice. But the question is, what's driving it? And did we just absorb that passively? Or did we really think it through and have a plan and implement our plan and then evaluate it, right? Maybe that was something that you purchased, right? You don't know. But if your thoughts and beliefs are formed like ripples on water, what made the concentric circles of your mind happen? What one came from one? Or where did all of those aspects of it tie together? Right? We're going to have fun playing with that today. One of the theorists I used, actually, I really liked it when I was at Columbia University for my doctorate. I used one of the theorists we're going to talk about today. So I just want to kind of have fun with it. But I want to invite you kind of on a journey with me, because, like I said, at the end of our day, one of the things I'm hoping is that you just slow that down and start thinking about it more. You know, last week we talked about the idea of the holidays coming up. I always like to play with the holidays on my show, especially this time of year, the traditions, the values, the people. Like to really work with it, because it is a time about relationships. And some of the ways that we have relationships have changed over time. That's what I talked about with the Jean Twenge book and the 5 generations last week, right? So we're going to kind of, dig down a little bit deeper on those kind of things, right? So how much of what you believe about yourself, your family, even your politics actually began in a different place on some of the circles I'm about to have fun playing with? So just kind of think about that and be curious about what I mean by it. There's an old expression I learned. I probably should look up who said it, but it's the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, right? So it's an interesting thing because when we were kids, when we were born, when we were in that first year of life, who was controlling our environment? Well, that could have been really good. It maybe for some isn't so good, but how did it influence you? How did that work? We're going to talk about some of those things today. Okay. So I just want to kind of talk about a little bit about, what people think about with regard to you and your money. One of the examples I came up with today is, you know, one of the things that marketers know is when you walk into a store. So let's say you were going into a big store that you'd never been before. Let's say you'd never been to Macy's in New York City and you were walking in the front door. Marketers and researchers know that you tend, if you don't know where you are, to kind of move towards the side of your dominant hand. So you kind of walk, this way. At least I would because I'm right-handed. Naturally, I don't go straight. I don't go left. I tend to list towards the right. So one of the things you may notice the next time you go to the store is they have lots of points of sale items that they want you to look at right away on the right side of the store. Now you may never even have thought, that those kind of things happen, but they do, and people think about it. Another one is if you put your picture on your website and people see a picture or just a picture of a human, you're 5 times more likely to have people pay attention to your website if there's a face there waiting. The same kind of thing happens on a billboard, those types of things. You're 5 times more likely to pay attention to what they want you to pay attention to. Now, you may not have known either of those, and you could probably give me 10 examples of stuff that you've noticed with that's driven by research. But if we don't think for ourselves, other people will think for us, and they'll be waiting for us with their ideas and opinions, just like I talked about, right? So, this is a really, really important thing. Let me give you another one. Let's say you see on TV on an ad or something, a celebrity endorsement, all right? Is what they're endorsing exactly what they do? Or is it really what they really know about? Or is it just that they're reading off a script from somebody who is advertising that says, hey, say this for us? And let's say they're actors, so they're good at acting, at selling you the product. So that's kind of what I mean. We have to stop and think for ourselves, what is it that's being presented to us, and how do we filter through that our own good opinions? Otherwise, we might absorb it, right? So that's an important thing. I know my field, but that doesn't mean I know other fields. But let's say I'm really a celebrity and people listen to me and follow me, and I say, hey, you ought to buy this. I may not know anything about it. So that's one of the things that's important. The other thing too is what shaped us to be persuaded by that. Did we want to be in the club of the person who is advertising to us? Did we think that by having that connection, does that kind of give us a membership into their club that they want to see us? Are we imagining that? I don't know. But how does it make us feel when we affiliate with, right? Now, people like to be members of clubs and they like to affiliate with people. So sometimes if we, associate with them, we can have a sense of belonging. I really, really like that personally when people are into sports clubs. When I was a kid, my dad and I always watched either the Browns or the Cowboys on football. I still to this day like to follow those teams. And it really isn't about them winning or losing. It's more about just remembering those times when I enjoyed my dad and watched those shows, right? But some people really follow it because if they're winning, they feel like winners, maybe. Who knows? But that's what I'm saying. Slowing down and being mindful about why we do something, I think is an important thing that we're going to talk about today. Right? And that's welcome to my show, all about relationships. So we're going to look at this and see how that affects relationships that are very important to you. Okay? So to the good, me and good, bad, and ugly, to the good. And this is something that I just believe. This is one of my beliefs. But one of the things that I've noticed over time is each generation has developed survival wisdom in their era. They've had to overcome adversity. They've had to endure maybe hardship. but they had to survive in some ways, right? We just went through COVID. Well, people have had to find a way through that. And to this day, right now, it has shaped some of our thoughts and beliefs about what is important and how we should live, right? The other thing is, because we have had what is that called, stay in place, right? We have to be by ourselves, and we couldn't go out in public. Well, all of a sudden now, talking to you over the airwaves is something that's more commonplace than it was 10 years ago, right? So we've found a way to adapt. People do that. Okay. So that, I think, is definitely human nature, the adaptation of people and the self, right? Another thing I always say on my show is that if it was true 2,000, 4,000 years ago, or if it's going to probably be true 2,000 years from now, that's what I want to concern myself with. This episode happens to be happening the day after the elections. I don't really talk about elections. I talk about trends of maybe elections, right? So we might talk about elections when it was 500 years ago. Might want to talk about how things were shaped in the 1700s. And is it probably going to be that way in the future? That's one of the things I like to look at, because it gets us away from, kind of staying into, kind of affairs that are occurring right now in our world, right? The other thing I think that's very true is people are very resilient. We find a way. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is kind of set the stage a little bit. And I'm probably going to go a little bit into my second section with this too. But I want to talk about a person who developed a theory. And this is a fancy name. I apologize. I try not to get like college-like, but ecological systems theory. A theory is, an idea about how things are. And I really liked this particular one. It's by a guy by the name of Urie Bronfenbrenner. And like I said, I used him to kind of understand how to make people better in my dissertation. But what he did was consider concentric circles. And I'm going to have my engineer put this up on there for you and leave it there for a little bit of time. But one of the things that he talked about is this idea of what I said earlier, which is like concentric circles. Like if you dropped a pebble in the pond and you saw the undulations of the water. What he noticed with this, and I'm going to explain it to you so you don't have to necessarily, scour this, but it's just good common sense that you can always remember. In the very beginning section is the child. So let's say the child is you and you're born. One of the things you notice is you're pretty much the center of the universe, especially as far as you're concerned, because you're just trying to figure everything out. So all of a sudden, that interaction with the world around you becomes the next concentric circle. And that concentric circle would be maybe moms, dads, brothers, sisters, grandparents, dogs, cats, fish, whatever around you, that you're developing something called schema. I know that's a fancy word too, but it's just you start to put everything together, right? And you start to understand the world based on the interaction with that group, right? Well, that's going pretty good. And then all of a sudden, your world starts to expand a little bit. Maybe you go to the grocery store with your mom and you're sitting in the cart and you're looking around. Now you start to see other people and other places. And maybe, now it extends a little bit more. You start going to maybe daycare and you start, looking around, and maybe have different things where other kids come by or whatever. Or maybe all of a sudden now you go over to your cousin's house, or maybe your next door neighbor's house, and those types of things. So all of a sudden we have another concentric circle, right? Okay, so this is kind of how Urie thinks the world was happening. So then after a while, you do something like go to kindergarten. Well, now that's a really big change, because now you're really with a lot of people your age, and you start to realize you have talent or you don't. And you also start going into the community. So now you have people that are educating you that are different from your immediate family. You're being educated by teachers. You're being educated by coaches. And you might be going over and learning how to swim, and you have a swim coach. So all of a sudden now the world becomes a different concentric circle. Okay? So very, very important. What I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to start going into a commercial. And when we come back, I'm going to keep going out on these concentric circles. And then we're going to start applying kind of how this begins to shape how we are and answer my question, what happens if you don't think for yourself? And what happens if other people start thinking for you? So we'll be back in a moment, and we'll be into our second set of the program.
Mike Zorek, a three-time California state champion in Greco-Roman wrestling at 114 pounds. Mike, blind since birth, was born in Hartford, Connecticut. He was a six-time national placer, including 2 seconds, 2/3, and 2/4. He also won the Veterans Folk-Style Wrestling twice at 152 pounds. In all these tournaments, he was the only blind competitor. Nancy Zorek, a creative spirit whose talents have taken her to the stage and into galleries and exhibitions in several states. Her father, a commercial artist who shared his instruments with his daughter and helped her fine-tune her natural abilities, influenced her decision to follow in his footsteps. Ms. Zorek has enjoyed a fruitful career doing what she loves. Listen Saturday mornings at 12 Eastern for the Nancy and Mike Show for heartwarming stories and interesting talk.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of The Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on The Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
All right, welcome back. Where I left you was, right at that time you're going to school and you're starting to learn all these new cool things in elementary school, and you have a whole new set of people that are really helping you out and learning and all those good things, right? So we keep going through school, we keep developing all of those things, but also what begins to happen is we're much more connected to the world now, right? If I said when I was in school, we might, have an assembly, something cool like that. But nowadays, you have those opportunities to constantly be on media, constantly look at things. And all of those things can shape how you're experiencing life, right? So now we not only have what's traditional, but we also have the media. If we have excessive media, we've also talked in the last few shows about the potential dangers for that with the mental health and emotional health and those sorts of things. But hopefully there's a lot of structure, and you're going to the library and you're learning to read, and now you're exposed to all the stuff in the books, and all of that stuff is happening. So let's keep going. As we start getting into junior high and we start getting into high school and stuff like that. Now, pretty much each class has a different teacher. Well, let's say that the teacher has ideas about how the world should be, that they're trying to teach you. And maybe they have different ideas about politics, or maybe they have different ideas about how to get you to think. All of this stuff begins to happen on this next level. And part of what you start to become aware of is maybe who's your elected officials in your community, or maybe you come from a community that's more affluent, or maybe you're more inner city. Maybe that's something that shapes you. I remember when I was at Columbia, I was helping one of my professors, and I was doing research in Brooklyn, New York back at the time. And there was this nun, her name was Sister Mary Paul, and she had an after-school program. And I was really privileged to really talk to the kids to understand how that program worked for them. And, one of the things I learned is it wasn't unusual in a classroom to maybe have 13 different languages in the classroom, because there was 13 different nationalities of kids that came to New York and were learning. And those teachers had to teach all of those people. Can you imagine? My hat's off to those kind of teachers. They're a special type. But, that's going to influence your world, right? And, how the community is impacted in the world. That's one of the reasons why Sister Mary Paul's program was so successful, because it provided a place for kids to go and away from the street where there might be dangers. And just that kind of thing. So now we're starting to look at outside influences of the world. Then you start getting out to be even more global. How about your state and your elected officials in your state, like we just saw yesterday? What about that? How is that going to change the idea about how we believe the world? So it's very important to understand that this stuff is happening in real time with us. The other thing that's happening is time moves on. So, for example, my grandparents' world was very different than this world. But I remember that, and I remembered their thoughts and beliefs and what was important to them. We talked about that last week, right? So what I'm suggesting is we don't just move through the world and absorb things. Rather, we start to say, hey, how do I want to think about that? How do I want to conduct the practice of my life? How do I want to make impact in a way that's good for me? And, we can think about that. How did we learn about saving money? How did we learn about whether we get educated? How did we learn about what do we want to do for a living and what we're passionate about? Because each one of those is going to begin to shape kind of our belief systems. Going into the military is going to really shape the way we think about things, right? So are we a team player? Are we more individual? Can we adopt a discipline like music or a sport or something like that when we're younger? All of these things begin to shape how we see the world. And one of the things that can happen too is as we go to college, where do we go? How are we influenced by that, right? So this is what Urie Bronfenbrenner talked about. It's just a way to think about how people interact and how our neurons are formed as we grow up and we become formative in our life, right? One of the ones I think is really interesting now is AI. And I like to play with AI myself. I don't know about you all, but one of the things that I do when I play with it is I get information, but that's where it stops. That's where it stops. I start to look over what AI has said if I'm using it, and then I decide for myself whether it's relevant or valid or whether or not I want to adopt it or not. One of the jokes before AI was, consulting Dr. Google, which means, are we going to listen to what Google says in terms of information we're putting into it with our medical health? I prefer to go to a doctor and listen to the doctor, and I want to go to one that I can relate to and trust and connect with. So this is kind of what I'm saying. We take in information, but at the time we get it to ourselves, I think it's very important we think for ourselves. And that's what I'm talking about. What I'm going to do too is we're going to take this and relate to people and how that works with it. But people, groups, and systems are well trained out there. Well trained. Believe me, I've seen this, right? They're well trained in trying to get us to be persuaded by what they need us to think. The first law of marketing, as I understand it, is fundamentally change the way your person sees your product, right? So we need to pay attention to that because those forces are out there and they're sophisticated. They're backed by science and research, right? One of the things that we can talk about right now is TikTok. TikTok is a major thing right now, but 10, 12 years ago, I think it was 2011, wasn't that Facebook? And all of a sudden Facebook was, oh my gosh, it's revolutionary. Well, it continues to go. And now with AI, you have another tool for persuasion that we have to be hip to, right? Okay, so we need to slow down. We need to be mindful in shaping how we see the world rather than absorbing others, right? So just very important things to think about. Every time I watch TV, I'm inundated with, medication commercials, insurance commercials, shows about sports, shows about relationships. Those things kind of walk us down a path. I mentioned, I think last week, there was a real shift to me in my mind when we went to the show when I was a kid, All in the Family, because that was the first time they were talking about social issues. Prior to that, the shows were kind of like upper middle class people just having situations in their community. So all of a sudden we began a shift, and then you can look at the history of television and watch how some of those shows are designed to shape the way we think. Fine, just make sure you're the one in charge of how to do that, right? Okay. So one of the things we talked about with the Gottman method is accepting influence. Okay, accepting influence. Remember what I say about that. That's really stopping to listen to other people's points of view and really trying to understand them, then giving your point of view and having them return the favor and the courtesy of listening. From that new data, you can begin to look at how you want to better your relationship, right? So when youth listen to the elders, they gain a pattern of that recognition of the differences that I was just mentioning earlier, right? So it's curiosity, not correction. But nowadays in our society, we very quickly can go to telling people how they should think. And if they don't think like us, I worry that, words like erase, I worry words like ghosting can begin to happen, which is kind of like a nuclear option to me. I mean, it's one thing to do that, but it's another thing to lead with it. I think that, one of the things that I notice with the stuff that I give people is you can usually repair and get back to a closer relationship if you know how to have that conflict. So we're looking into that, and we're going to have fun in this show helping you all do that better, right? But that's really important. Every generation has new information. Every generation, and that's a good thing, right? But there needs to be wisdom across generations that also, right, that do need to and should endure over time. I'll give you an example. One of the things that I really like since when I was a kid is there was a tendency in research that women tended to vote the way their husbands voted in elections. Nowadays, that doesn't happen as a trend. I think that's a really good thing because women have a lot of really good ideas that we need to have in the arena of ideas to form how we proceed. Right? I don't know about you all, but in my world, I had a lot of very intelligent women that helped shape me when I was a kid. Glad I accepted their influence, right? So we need different ideas. We need to have an exchange of ideas, but we also need to have a way of communicating that makes us closer rather than divides. I'm going to say to you, you need to decide for yourself how you want to do that. We're coming up on the holidays. And sometimes holidays, we've drifted away from connecting with people that used to be dear to us. Maybe that's necessary, but maybe it deserves a second thought about how did we drift away from connections with people that were very important to us. And listen, we all know this, from Thanksgiving to Thanksgiving, for example, how many times did you think you're going to see somebody the next Thanksgiving and they're no longer with us? So, we want to make sure that we really cherish these times. And when time stops for Thanksgiving, that we take account of being grateful for the people that we do have in our lives and use the good skills to make sure that we can maintain those relationships. Just very, very, very important. All right. So let's look at this. I'm going to give you one from the mailbag today. Let's see. Here's one. I found myself arguing with my sister about something I saw online, but I don't even remember where I first heard that thing. Why do I get so emotional about things I didn't even research? Well, not to really offer an answer to that one, but to invite you all to think about, does that ever happen in your life? That you have an opinion about something. I notice people do that a lot of times with sports. They'll hear something on a sports show and then they kind of use that information in dialogue. And I think that's fine. I think that's okay. But we also want to know, where do we get that information? And a lot of people like to do that because they want to sound knowledgeable when they talk about sports and stuff like that. So that's not a bad thing as long as you're mindful about where it came from, why you're using it, and why you agree with it, and then accept influence. Sports are kind of great because we can root for things. I think the word fan comes from fanatic. I think we all know that. And what that means is I'm just crazy for my team. I just am not even rational. I root for them so much. It's nice to have escapes like that. Right. So I think those are good things. I wouldn't advise doing that with things like politics because that has real impact on our lives, whereas football is a good entertainment or basketball. But, we want to be very mindful that our decisions can have impact in our lives, and we want to be aware of that and what to do with it. So I'm seeing about 30 seconds to go. I may come up with one other mail question when we come back. But let's go ahead and go to the second commercial break, and we come back, and I'm going to give you some practical information on how we can use this to our benefit with relationships. We'll see you soon.
Master of words, powerful player, What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness: Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals.
Okay, we're back, and I just want to stay a little bit more with the mailbag today, and then we're going to go into kind of how to make this work that we're talking about work for you. Okay, but again, you notice it's you think for yourself. You know, I could have very easily kind of gone along and then kind of sold you an idea that I think is good. And that's what happens a lot of times on shows. All I'm inviting you to do is to be a good consumer of your own thought. So the next one I want to talk about on the mailbag is, this one's interesting, and I see it a lot. You know, our adult kids don't want to come home for the holidays. And when we ask, they feel like, well, we don't get it. You guys don't understand. And the question here was, how can we reconnect with our kids without walking on eggshells? Well, the reason I brought this up is the last couple shows that I've done really talk about this. You know, it invites people with both hands open to really listen to what concerns the other person has. And a lot of times those I need statements are doable. People are willing to be flexible and accommodating. So let's say, you know, somebody wants to make a traditional turkey dinner, but somebody else is now vegetarian. Okay, well, you know, if no, you can't come to my house unless you eat turkey, it's going to be hard to have a good Thanksgiving like that. But, you know, hey, maybe we have different dishes and we all try them and we talk about them. And maybe we talk about why it's important to kind of not eat meat, or why is it important to eat more vegetables? You know, one thing I notice about younger generations is they seem to have learned how to eat a lot more healthy than I do. And I take a page out of their book. I really like to know what those things are about. And I do know the school systems, by and large, have been really good at teaching nutrition, a lot better than they did when I was in school. So again, good teachers come in with good information. We evolve. That's always happened, you know, back to 2,000 years ago. You know, the generation just about where my parents were, a lot of people smoked. Well, when my generation came on board, you know, that really reduced because people began to realize that was bad for you. So that generation evolved out of it. Well, eating better into the next generation, I think, is a really good thing. So being able to talk in a way that invites curiosity rather than, you know, an arm wrestling contest about who's going to eat turkey, I think is better. So keep that in mind as you look at this. If you're really having trouble with that question, watch my last two shows, because I talk about ways to talk that's a lot of fun and both hands open, and hopefully, you know, people can do that in a way that invites connection and bids for positivity. Remember, 5 positives to 1 negative whenever you're talking in those situations, right? Okay. So one thing I talked about in a show a while back that you can also watch is something that I call drift. And drift is when we just have our values and beliefs and we just kind of go about our lives and all of a sudden we look up and things are different. People do this all the time. I mean, how many times do you talk to somebody that says, I don't exactly know how I did it, but I gained 10 pounds, right? Well, how did that happen? Well, probably not mindful in either how the body changes over time. I noticed for me, looking at having weight happened about 44 years of age. And all of a sudden you look and say, well, wait a minute, I didn't used to gain weight when I ate whatever I wanted. Wonder what happened. So you drift. The other thing about drift is really important is you can't just say, okay, I'm back to where I was. And you wake up the next day and you've lost 10 pounds. It has to kind of slowly go back off. So, your body kind of pendulates slowly when it comes to those things, right? So I used to exercise a lot when I was younger, and I'd go to the gym and I would train like for running and stuff. And I always was glad the week after Valentine's Day. Now, this isn't scientific. You'd want to talk to somebody in a health club if you want the real information. All I noticed is about a week after Valentine's Day, all of the people that came in for New Year's as a New Year's resolution to lose weight weren't there anymore. And I had the gym to myself. And I really like that better. Now, that's not scientific, but believe me, I'll bet you somebody's done research on that. But anyway, that's a good example of how people drift away from their original New Year's resolutions. With relationships, one of the things that can happen is maybe we get involved in something and all of a sudden we take all the time to let go play softball or volleyball or something. And all of a sudden we're not hanging out with our partner like we used to. All of a sudden we've drifted away from the time normally we would spend here to spend it there. And that's impacting our relationships. It requires a conversation, but it's innocent because we drifted into it. We didn't really think we would do that, but all of a sudden, that's what happens. Aging happens that way too. All of a sudden, we look up and things that we used to do, we don't do anymore. So this requires slowing down, being mindful, and talking to people we care about how they see us and what they notice. I always say, if I have mustard on my face right here, you see it, but I don't. So I want somebody to say, hey, Don, check the mustard on your face. Well, hey, check to see what's going on, right? So maybe when I don't making this up, maybe when I'm 42, 43, my mom would say, hey, Don, be careful. I think you're gaining some weight. Well, that's good to know. It's not an insult. It's not a put down. It's a heads up. But I can hear it as a criticism. So again, we always want to give feedback when we're asked. And the other thing we want to do is we want to say it in a way that's a heads up or a complaint, not a criticism of the person. Criticism is one of the 4 horsemen: criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. So remember that. So what questions we want to talk about now? Where are we now with our belief system? How did it change? What was different? What affected it very strongly, right? What has changed from the past? What's different? So maybe we do things differently because things are better now. Maybe we have a revolution because we have a better idea of how to do it, right? How has your own drift impacted you? I'm going to have people on about the issue of drift. I've kind of decided, really, really important when I did my research, but also just in everyday life, kind of how to be predictable with that, because there are lots of people who've studied it and it'd be fun to get them on and tell you about it, right? The other thing with relationships, I'm going to say again, just as if you don't think for yourself, others will think for you. Do we throw the baby out with the bathwater? One thing I mentioned earlier is a lot of times I worry that people go to the nuclear option. Something goes wrong, so we just don't talk to them anymore. We ghost them. We get into other kind of people. Remember, we have this idea nowadays, and I bet you've heard of it, is Friendsgiving, right? Instead of Thanksgiving. In other words, we go to our friend's house rather than we go to family. Well, why did we need to erase family if that were happening? I'm going to the extreme here. But why, and why didn't we have a conversation? And there's nothing wrong with Friendsgiving, but we can also have traditional with other people, right? That's really important, like I said, with folks now, because a lot of times with media, it's instantaneous. You can text, you can do all these things, but older generations may not do that. And as a result of it, we can inadvertently isolate people. And remember what I said, people live alone now, according to the last census I looked at, about 30 to 33% of the time. That's different from the late 60s, where it was only about 7% of the people lived alone. That's a lot of isolation, and it's a lot of individualism that, might be okay, back to thinking it through. But what about that? Are we really, good stewards of other people to look and see what they need as well as what we need? But it does involve slowing down, because we could get so involved in our media that we don't realize we drifted away from connecting with the people that are very important to us, or that we mean the world to them and we're not coming around. So heads up with that, especially during the holidays, right? Now see, again, you're getting into my values and belief system, but I learned at a very early age that we look out for one another. One of the reasons I have this TV show and this radio show is that we look out for each other. And part of what I'm trying to do, to the best of my ability, is look out for you and look out for what's important for you, because that isolation stuff, we're not wired as humans to have that. So want to pay attention to that. And one of the reasons I'm doing this, I invite you to consider doing it in your way, right? The other thing too is, 100 years ago, people, I love this word, propinquity. And what that means is people had a tendency of marrying somebody within 25 miles of where they were born. We don't live in that world anymore. I was young enough, or I'm old enough now. I remember actually flying on TWA, Trans World Airline, and little bitty jets, not big jets, but you wore a tie when you went, right? And what was interesting about it is that, not a lot of people flew. Not a lot of people even left their state. But nowadays, people do much more, go out and see the world, or go to different places, or go to schools in different parts of the country. It's a new world with that, right? So just very, very important to consider that. So what matters to you with that? So what I'm encouraging you to do is to look at that and slow down. And when you watch commercials, ask yourself, what are they trying to sell you? How are they trying to sell you? I remember a long time ago, they used to have board games. They still do, but I mean, a lot of the games now are with media driven. But they would show a whole family playing the game of life, or the game of Monopoly or something. But what it really showed was kids having fun with their parents, and their parents slow and happy and not tired, and everybody's paying attention to everybody else. I don't think they were selling the game to me, at least this is my opinion, as much as they were really selling the idea of the family being happy and relaxed and connected, right? So if you buy this game, that's what you'll get. Or you'll put it in your closet and you'll never play it. So it really depends, right? It depends on what you do with the game, but how are they getting you to buy it is something you want to slow down and pay attention to. Then you're free to make a good decision the way you want. You might want to buy the game, but you might want to say, yeah, I don't want to. So very, very important with that, because we're going to try to take this information, slow down. You notice this time more than other times, I'm really starting with you. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll say, you talk to your partner. But this time I want to say, wait a minute. I want you to slow down and be mindful about how you think and what's shaping the ideas that you're thinking about. Why are you doing that? Right? So it's just kind of a fun game, especially if you happen to watch a commercial or something. Just watch how they're entertaining you, but watch how they're targeting it. Right? So it's kind of fun to do. I was watching commercials today, and one of my favorite commercials that's endured over time is Poppin' Fresh. That little dough guy that teaches you how to buy dinner rolls. And he's talking to this kid, and it looks like it's around Thanksgiving, and, talks about saying, I love grandma. And the kid says, I love grandma. And then he says, well, and you can say, I love grandma's dinner rolls. Right? Well, that's a wonderful thing, but they're trying to sell you dinner rolls, right? And listen, I'm not knocking them. I'm not putting them down in any way, but I did notice how they guided that kid to talk to grandma about dinner rolls, right? And why not? I mean, the kid sees that. He sees that to grandma, and grandma wants to buy and, make some dinner rolls for the kid. Just be mindful about how that's working. And then, if you want to go buy dinner rolls, I recommend it and I really like their product. So up to you, up to you. So why don't we go ahead and go to our last break, and then I'm going to come back to do the fourth section, which is that thing we're all going to go out and do and have some fun applying some of the wonderful things we talked about. Remember today, if you don't think for yourself, other people will think for you, and I want to help you slow down so that you can have a better quality of life. We'll see you right after the break.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent, but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Master of words, powerful player. What life-changing words can Dr. Janet Smith Warfield pull out of her magical toolbox that just might mysteriously open a door you never knew was there? A door to free yourself from fear forever. Transform your rage into right action. Release your guilt. Position you into a life of freedom, purpose, passion, power, and peace. All quite suddenly, unexpectedly, and almost miraculously, with no effort on your part. Join Dr. Janet on Dancing with Words, Dancing with Wisdom, as she and her guests show you how words map our experiences, immersing you in a sound bath that relaxes your muscles, opens your mind, and supports you in co-creating your extraordinary life.
All right, we're back, and I cannot believe how fast our hour has gone today. This has been a lot of fun to be with you. It's been a lot of fun to do this show, and I hope that you guys can slow down and say, "Yeah, let me think about why I think the way I think, and let me think about whether I've been influenced by something, and then if I have, why I was influenced by that." So have a lot of fun doing that. But today we're going to do that exercise I always give you at the end of the day. So remember, safety first, right? With anything, your family, I don't. So just remember all of that. But, if you're brave and you'd like to kind of find a way to get reconnected with people, maybe you can, put your toe in the water. So the first thing you want to do when you're doing this exercise I give you today is set the intention and the tone. And what I mean by that is talk to people with both hands open. Talk to people in a non-threatening way that lets them know you're doing it because you care about them, not because you're trying to move them in a certain direction. Okay. Next, start with appreciation. One thing I love or admire about you, who you're talking to. I just think you're amazing. And one of the reasons I think you're amazing is because of this. And I just really like it. Make sure it's unconditional, right? Make sure it's unconditional. That's something you just like because they're them, not because they're good at just cooking. So as long as you make me a steak, I like you. No, I like you because you're awesome. And one of the things you like to do is share good food with me. And I just can't imagine having a better time than hanging out with you and sharing food, something like that. So the next thing you want to do is share honestly, the point of view that you want to know more about. What I like to do is I like to start with how they see things. So you might have a topic about something. Tell me about when you come to Thanksgiving, what it's like for you with us. And be honest, don't be insulting, but let us know if it's a fun time, if it's not a fun time, those kind of things, right? So one of the things that you want to do as you're listening to the traditions and all of that, I'm just using Thanksgiving because it's coming up, but you want to listen to things about fundamental positive values, fundamental beliefs that people have, fundamental ethics. What do you notice about your partner that's positive, and also where we've drifted away. And one of the things that's to keep in the back of your mind is what becomes more important than, right? So what has happened that it's more important, let's say, not to go to Thanksgiving? Or why is it more important that that we don't talk about certain things? Or why is it more important that we stay focused on something that's happened in the past that's caused a wedge for us? Just be curious, right? Be curious about what happened. And then where are you flexible? Where can you move back towards that connection, right? Once you've asked your person that, the one you're talking to, invite them to bring your opinion into things, right? And remember from my show last week, you really want to do that in the spirit of curiosity. I was talking last week about how people did it back in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. What did you notice when you were a kid and you went to holidays? How has that changed? What's better? What's worse? But in the spirit of that, not in the spirit of, and another thing you do wrong, and you know what you do wrong here, and another, don't want to do that. You don't want to get it because that's criticism, right? 96% of the time, we know from the Gottman research, when that happens, it's going to go bad. And the other thing you always want to keep in mind when you're doing this is 5 positives to 1 negative. And positives don't have to be 5 compliments. If you look at somebody like this, it's like, hey, I really want to know kind of what your opinion is. I've thrown you about 15 bids with my body and my tone that really invite you to say, hey, Don wants to know. So positivity is about sending those 5 to 1 ratios or higher of that connection, that you really care about the person and you are upbeat with it. So try to do that. When you start getting into the negatives, it's a problem. If you ever watch those 24-hour news shows, try to count positives to negative ratio. You're going to find that a lot of times, whatever their political bent is, the positives go to their side and the negatives go to the other side. So we don't want to do that with family and people we love. We want to stay with that 5 to 1. And we know that that kind of stuff really, really can work well in a relationship. So I want you to look at that. What would make you happier and more connected if we did this? That's a great question to ask, right? And then what you can do is look at where you won't yield, where you're not flexible. And then you can look at where you can be flexible and then try it out and then talk about how did it go better or worse. But see, now you're on the road towards connectivity. You're not into the division and the loggerheads where you can't yield to win and you can't move off of your opinion, right? A lot of times people do have these strong beliefs and stuff, but most of the time the other person can be flexible around yours and you can be flexible around theirs, right? So, we can think about that. I just mentioned with Thanksgiving, there's lots of ways to have a menu. Some people say, I really like Thanksgiving, but, I have to do this or that. How about we do it on Saturday, right? So, it really, really can depend on, what the needs are with people, but you have to have a conversation, and it can't be about right or wrong. It has to be about how everybody can have a great time. So I want you to do that for me, if you will. Remember, safety first. Next week, we're coming back with a new show, and I'm excited to see you next week. So please come back. I invite you to go to some of the shows that I've done in the past. These a lot of times build on each other, and they also offer you on that 4th segment something really cool that you can do to try to make your relationship better. I'm Dr. Don Allen. This is all about relationships, working towards ideal marriage and loving, lasting relationships. Thank you for joining me. I hope that this is helpful for you and helpful for the people you love. Take care, and I will see you next week.
While All About Relationships is educational and entertaining, it is not a substitute for therapy, counseling, or professional advice, but an informative space for learning and growth. So tune in each week for an engaging and reliable approach to your relationships, ensuring viewers with practical tools to create deeper connections in their daily lives. Whether tackling conflict resolution, emotional intimacy, or family dynamics, this show is your go-to go-to resource for anyone looking to foster healthier, happier relationships in a supportive and lighthearted environment. Every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern.